As you may or may not know, I went to college at Conception Seminary College in Conception, Missouri. It's a pretty big town, very large. No, it's just a small Benedictine monastery in the middle of nowhere, northwest Nebraska. The closest gas station is 20 minutes away. Like if you drive fast, like I do, like it is out in the boonies. But during my time there, in the main building, it's like the main seminary building there on campus, the main school building, we had a wall dedicated to some very prominent alumni. And these alumni were both ordained priests who had given a heroic witness to their faith, priests who had laid down their lives for others that had also attended that school. One of them we talked about last week, and that's Father Emil Capon, or Father Capon, as we often call him. He's an alumnus of Conception Seminary College. The other priest on the wall was Father Stanley Rother. Father Stanley was a priest of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. Okay, and Father Stanley is actually the most recently named martyr of the Catholic Church. He's Blessed Stanley Rother now. And Father Stanley, he lived and worked most of his priesthood in Guatemala. And there in Guatemala, he was killed, martyred for his faith. So yeah, there was this wall there at my school dedicated to these two priests, just a little memorial for them. When I went back to Conception a little bit over a year ago, they invited me back to give a retreat. I don't know why. But I went back and gave a retreat for the seminarians that were there. And I noticed when I went past that wall, there was a little bit of a change. Right? They had added another picture to that wall. Right? There was Father Capon. There was Father Rother. And then there was a seminarian from the Diocese of Wichita. One of my classmates, actually. Right? A guy by the name of Brian Burkamp. Okay, on July 9th, 2016, I was still a seminarian. I was down in Wichita. I was a chaplain that summer. I was working at Via Christi Hospital. I was dressed as a priest walking around the hospital, so everybody thought I was a really helpful guy. And I was just like, fake priest, sorry, no help. But there I was working in the hospital, praying with people. And it was a Saturday morning, so I wasn't working that day. It was my brother's birthday, so I was over at my parents' house just hanging out with the family. And I get a call. From one of my other classmates. And he just calls me up and says, hey, Brian and his friends, they were out kayaking this morning on the Arkansas River. And there was an accident, and we can't find Brian. Right, Brian, he grew up in Garden Plain. So if you know where Garden Plain is, just west of Wichita, there in Sedgwick County. Grew up in Garden Plain, grew up on a farm, dairy farmer most of his life, the Burkamps are. And if you know the family, like they're just, salt of the earth people. Nothing extraordinary about Brian either. Like he's just a good guy, had the same sort of struggles that we all sort of have. But Brian had this desire to serve God and to serve others. And that's really what drew him to the priesthood. There he was in seminary working towards becoming a priest. If you ask his mom, and many people have, they didn't really do anything special, they would say. They grew up in Garden Plain, but then they went to church on Sundays. They prayed together as a family in the evenings. Brian would serve at Mass. Brian, when he was in high school, he'd go on like a lot of the trips we send our kids on here. Like he'd go to the Steubenville youth conferences, or he'd go to the March for Life in January. He'd do sort of things like that. I spent several years with Brian in seminary. He's just the man. Like he's just the absolute best. Always smiling, always helping out. Brian's the man. But again, on July 9th, 2016, Brian was out on a Saturday morning with a bunch of his friends, just going kayaking on the Arkansas River. I know we don't know what rain is here anymore, but it was actually raining a bunch that summer, and so the Arkansas River was pretty swollen. And so they hit some choppy waters, boats overturned, and all of a sudden they're in a bit of a crisis situation. One of the gals in the group, she got thrown out of her kayak without a life jacket, and so she got in some pretty deep trouble pretty fast. So naturally, again, no one was surprised when we hear this part of the story, but very naturally, Brian goes over to help her. And Brian takes his boat over towards her. His boat eventually gets tipped over as well. And he just gives this gal his life jacket, gives her one solid shove towards the shore, and she makes it. And Brian saves this gal's life. But that was the last time that we ever saw Brian. A couple weeks later, just by happenstance, I was on the shore as the Wichita Fire Department finally found his body and brought him back ashore. And as I saw them taking him over to the ambulance, like I knew, like we were looking at the next saint of the church. Like that's just what Brian was. Like here's this man that just laid down his life for another. And it was really cool, actually, because on his bucket list, they found his little bucket list a couple weeks later. One of the things on his bucket list was I want to save someone's life. Like, crushed it, Brian. You did it. So yeah, Brian really does deserve that spot on the wall next to people like Father Roth, or next to people like Father Capon. Here's this new prominent alumni of Conception Seminary College, Brian, who laid down his life for others. Brian didn't do this because, he really wanted to be on the cover of the paper, even though ironically he ended up on the cover of the paper. Brian did this because of his faith. Right? This is how Brian lived his life. Brian's faith pushed him towards a life of heroic witness to his faith, even to the point of laying down his life, and that he did. This is the kind of faith that we've been talking about a lot, but this is the kind of faith that we want to imitate and the kind of response that we want to imitate. Because in this extreme case, Brian literally, physically laid down his life. Great. But no one was surprised about that, because that's just how Brian lived his life. Each and every day, Brian was laying down his life for others. His life, like Brian was preparing literally to lay down his life, not physically, but literally lay down his life as a priest, right? To lay down his own dreams and his own hopes and his own plans for his life so that he could serve God and serve others. I mean, we were classmates. He very easily could have been here, standing here instead of me, and you guys would have enjoyed that a whole lot more, I can guarantee you that. But that's who he was. Same thing with Father Capon. At the end of his life, Father Capon heroically laid down his life physically for the men in the prison camp. But each and every day, Father Capon had been laying down his life for others. Where does this sort of a thing come from? It's a very scary thing to do, to think I want to lay down my life for others. Why? What gave Father Capon, what gave Brian the ability to do that? And it can sound oversimplified, but what gave them the strength and the ability to do that was the hope that underscored their entire life. And the simple hope that Paul was talking about in our second reading to the Thessalonians. It's a simple hope, but it is like the game-changing hope. This is what Paul said to the Thessalonians. Remember, Paul had been working with them for about 3 weeks, and then he had to leave. So there was a couple unanswered questions. And clearly, one of the unanswered questions that the Thessalonians had was, all right, Paul, you talked about how Jesus has defeated death and he's defeated sin. Jesus promises us joy and eternal life and all this stuff. But my cousin just died. Or my friend just died from the persecution. And the Thessalonians had this question, Paul, you talk a big game, but all of a sudden these people are dying around us. Is this worth it? What gives? What's going on here? And so Paul writes back to him, and he said this in our second reading, in direct response to that. Paul said this, we do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters. Don't be unaware about those who have fallen asleep, so that you may not grieve like the rest, those who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose, so too God, through Jesus, will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. And so Paul's telling him, yes, death is still a reality of our life. We still endure it. But we don't look at death in the same way as others. We don't experience grief in death the same way as others. Yes, we grieve, but we don't grieve without hope. Why? Because our hope is that Jesus, who died and rose, Jesus will also raise us from the dead. That's like that is the hope that we have as Catholics, as Christians. And that's what literally changes everything. It literally changes everything in our life. Because as we've talked about with this modern progressive vision that we live with, that we just assume is true, in this modern progressive vision of life, each one of us has 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years left. And then we're going to kick the bucket, and then it's all going to be done. That's the modern progressive vision. And so what it tells you is, enjoy life while you can. Like, experience the most you can in life. Because guess what? It's all going to come crashing down soon. It's a very, very tough way to live. So that's why we do. We do it, right? We live that way. That's why we're so busy. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. That's why we try to just always do all these other sorts of things. And I know that if I gave you a test, if I gave you a quiz, you would say, I don't believe that, Father. I'm a Catholic and I know the right answers. I know you know the right answers. But the way we live, so often the way that we live is assuming that modern progressive vision is right. I only got 5, 10, 20, 30 years left. So I better live it up while I can. So Paul says, we don't want you to be unaware. Don't be unaware of how things really work. There is so much more. Father Capon, Brian Burkamp, the way that they live their life, it shows us there is so much more. Don't be unaware of that. And they responded with their whole lives. Again, not just at the end of their life, but throughout their life in very real, very concrete, very practical ways. Just like the Thessalonians, it's the faith of people like Father Capon and Brian Burkamp that turns the world upside down. You know, as you walked in, I don't know if you grabbed one. You can grab one on your way out. You know how I love my handouts. I love them so much. We printed off this really cool little booklet for you. And really what it is it's just a simple tool to make this very concrete and practical. Again, I know we can listen to inspiring stories about people every single week, and it inspires us. But then we walk out the door, and it's just like, well, I got life. See ya. This is a way to help us put it into practice, to help us think through what's going on, to really help us make this concrete and applicable in our lives. I'm not going to read this little booklet to you right now. You can take it home. It's designed for you to just be able to start at the cover and then work to the back, and you'll do great. But what it essentially helps you do is it helps you make just a little kind of roadmap for your life. At the top of it, it helps you make what we call a rally cry. A rally cry is just hey, what's the thing that I need to focus on the most in the next 3 to 6 months? If I'm going to really respond in faith to Jesus, what's that thing that I really need to work on in the next 3 to 6 months? Maybe it's I need to respond to God's call in my life. It can be as simple as that, just simple little thing for you to remember. Maybe it's, I need to make time for God in my life. It can be a simple little thing like that. But what is that thing I need to focus, personally me, what is the thing I need to focus on most in the next 3 to 6 months? Then what this booklet really helps you do is it helps you make what we call defining objectives, which is just a nerdy way of saying, what are the concrete, practical things that I need to do in order to accomplish that goal? And it kind of breaks it down in different parts of your life and different parts of our faith. What are concrete ways that I can start to do that in my life? And then the third thing that it does, and it'll help you do this towards the end of the booklet, is it helps you kind of recognize what we call standard objectives. And that's just the stuff you need to get done every day. Because I know you're busy. We all know we're busy. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. We're all busy. We all got work. We all got kids. We all got stuff to do at home. And we get that. We've all got stuff to do. No one's trying to deny that. And yet what happens so often in our life is that standard stuff, it becomes the only stuff. Because it's the only stuff we make time for. What this really helps us to do is say, all right, how can I set up my life so that, I get all the stuff done that I need to get done. But then I also place first and foremost in my life that thing that I need to focus on the most, that thing that is most important, which is my faith. Again, it's very, very easy for us. It's very easy for us to be I'm going to get to my faith one day. I know God's important. Never said he wasn't. But I'm going to get to it one day. What's easy then to do is to point to our gospel, to what Jesus is saying, and to recognize what Jesus is saying. He's talking about the 5 who are wise and the 5 who are foolish. And all of this gospel is about the fact that, what does Jesus say? Stay awake for you know neither the day nor the hour. Stay awake, Jesus says. Don't be unaware. Don't live your life in fantasy land. Stay awake, for you do not know the day and you do not know the hour when the Lord will come. Brian was 24. You think Brian woke up on July 9th, 2016 thinking, yep, today about 9:17 a.m., that's going to be my call? No. And yet Brian wasn't taken by surprise because Brian lived his life with that awareness each and every day. Right? In other words, this response of our faith is something that is quite urgent. It's very easy. We've got a lot of urgent things in our life, we know. And yet what is most urgent for us, as Jesus reminds us in the gospel today, is this. Because we do not know the day. We do not know the hour. Easy to think we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years left. But we do not know the day and we do not know the hour. So today's question is quite simple. What is my rally cry? What is that thing that I really need to start focusing on in these next 3 to 6 months? Again, don't try to plan the next 30 years. What's just the next couple of months? What is it that I need to focus on most And what are the concrete steps that I can take to do that? So again, that's what that little booklet's for. You can grab one on the way out. Here in this Eucharist, we come each and every week very practically to center our lives once again on Christ. We come here practically once again each and every week to renew our covenant with the only one that can give us what we truly want, which is that eternal life. And we come here knowing that our hope is not like everyone else's hope. Everyone hopes for something for the next couple of years, but our hope is something eternal. And so we come here, and just as the Lord in this Eucharist gives himself to us, practically, concretely, we seek to give ourselves back to him in return.